Synergy happens when you're able to extract more value from a card by playing it alongside another card. We talk a lot about cards and decks being synergistic, but what does that look like? How can I tell if my deck has synergy, and how can I increase the synergy in my deck? Today, we're going to look at a few methods that I use to build synergy into my own decks and leave you with a model you can apply to your own decks. I'm Chris, and today I'm your Spike on the mic, and we're talking about synergy. When I'm laying out a deck to build, I like to look at the different strategies I'm using in this deck. Typically, I use a 1, 2, 3 methodology, where I have one strategy, a secondary strategy, and a tertiary strategy. When I lay out cards that I'm including, I look at what cards cross the borders between what I'm trying to do, whether it's attacking, decking my opponents, or dealing direct damage. If there's something that's useful across multiple strategies, I lay them out visually so I can see what my plan is and what I'm looking for if my primary strategy doesn't work. There are many different ways to build decks. No one builds them the same way, but if your deck is struggling to do the thing, looking at the synergy of cards included is the best way to improve consistency. To discuss this method, I've got Jim in the studio with me today. Jim, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris. This is a beautiful studio, by the way.
Fantastic, right?
So,
yes,
this is exciting. This is a little bit of a guest Spike on the mic with our good friend Chris, your Commander Mechanic. If you want to take a look at Chris's content, he's got some great deck techs. I'll put those in the video description below. But today, we're in the studio talking about synergy.
Thank you for having me here at Spike Feeder's headquarters. I am excited to talk about deck building and synergy and the way that we can put cards together to improve decks. It's kind of my whole thing.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I thought this was going to be a really good topic. This actually came up. We were playing Among Us. This is
Yes.
months ago. Remember Among Us? We were playing Among Us, and we do this thing called Ghost Radio, where we do a radio show when you're dead.
All of the dead get to talk to each other.
They get to talk to each other in the form of a radio show. So you do interviews, you ask people questions. It's all really lighthearted and fun. And when I was on Ghost Radio, I was the only one that had died. I got airlocked really early. And we were playing with magic people. It was Chase, Mana Curves, and a couple other people. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give you guys a deck tech for my Vial Smasher deck. And I started talking about synergy mapping. Mm-hmm. Because the way that I conceptualize this in my head is pretty much exactly what you described in the intro to this episode, right?
Yeah.
Is talking about functional packages, visualizing like a Venn diagram, and then looking at the overlapping cards as where your deck's strength comes from.
Exactly. And those overlaps is where you get to extract more from a card and more from your deck more reliably. Mm-hmm. The more cards that you have working across multiple strategies, it means that you aren't going to draw strategy B when you're trying to do strategy C and are left with a bunch of cards that aren't going to get you there.
Yeah, I'm sure if you've ever played combo decks before, especially all-in combo decks, you've probably had that experience of drawing one half of an A plus B combo and being like, oh, I've got my Metalworker, I just need a Staff of Domination, and the game is over, right? And then the next combo piece that you draw is something else entirely. It's like Clock of Omens or something like that.
Right.
And you're like, now I've got two pieces of two different combos, and it's just two cards in my hand that do nothing, right?
Right. And in some cases, you might look at that and you might say, I can do either strategy A or strategy B, mm-hmm. but you aren't actually doing either one. And you open yourself up to the risk of playing combo piece A and having it removed before you ever get access to the other piece of it. Being able to have redundancies for cards in your deck or decks that do things alongside other cards more reliably is how you get to do the thing. Mm-hmm. Building a deck that does the thing is what a lot of people want to do, whether it's winning or whether it's making a million Gyrudas. Doing the thing is what your core conceit of your deck should be.
Yeah. And so CEDH calls that redundancy in combo decks, at least, they'll call that layered combos, mm-hmm. right? And that's that you've got three combo pieces that all combo together, but one of those pieces is also part of a different combo. That middle piece is really great because if you draw that, you've now got two different options. Options of strength.
Right? Wide open in terms of your path to winning.
Right. Right. So let me ask you something, because this is like it, as it turns out, this is like how we both visualize building decks,
yes.
which is quite unique.
Yeah.
And actually, the same way that a couple other people that I talked to about the same topic, I brought it up with Glenn Jones, and Glenn Jones was on a prior Spike on the Mic talking about the role of the ban list. He is the commander technical lead, and apparently this is how he visualizes deck synergy as well, which is really cool.
Which is interesting because he puts together precons.
He does.
As well. So.
He does. And so the interesting part about precons, the way that they're built, we weren't going to talk about precons, but I think it's an interesting topic. The cool thing about precons is that they've generally got a couple distinct strategies in them with not a lot of overlap. And they're kind of designed that way deliberately to act as, if you imagine this as like you're a DM for a Dungeons and Dragons session, this is like a hook. So this is like when the bartender says, oh, there's been a lot of commotion at night outside city limits, right?
Are your players going to sink their teeth into that one or any of the other story threads that you've laid out? And that's what the precons are about. Which one of these strategies do you want to lean into further? And there are ways to combine them and make synergies between those. But typically with a precon, that's where they want you to add cards into it. Yeah,
so they're kind of shallow, right? They've got a lot of what we call like the primary synergies that you were talking about, right? They don't go too deep. So if you look at your commanders, whatever your commander does as a primary synergy, like Prosper, as an example. Prosper is a really popular card these days. Prosper, as a primary synergy, might have things like Impulse Draw, right? Light up the stage, right? It exiles cards, and then Prosper will allow you to benefit from playing exiled cards. So that'll be your first order synergy. Your second order synergy might be something like a tutor for an instant or a tutor for a sorcery or something like that, right?
Or another order of synergy might be something that works with the treasure tokens that Prosper creates off of creating cards.
Yeah, and we call that secondary because those cards don't actually do anything. If they're like amplifying the number of treasure tokens that you're making.
Like a Zorn, for instance.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything if you're not making those treasures.
Exactly.
Right? So it's kind of got a dependency there. So like certain things have to be in place before these cards are useful. And if you go too deep on those types of things,
then you end up with pieces of your deck that just don't work when you draw them. And that gives players the real feel bads out of their own deck. When you draw a hand or you're top decking and you draw a card that's just dead, that means that your synergies have gone too wide. It means that you're getting into those second and third order of synergies where you've got a card that's only good if you draw this one other card in your deck.
Right.
And unless you're running a boatload of tutors or your commander tutors something up, you're going to draw that card more often than not, and it's not going to do anything. Synergy is ensuring that you've got more of those first order of magnitude synergies in there. So no matter what you're doing, you have ways to improve the value of cards that you have in your deck. And whether that's reducing costs or increasing the value ceiling on cards, that is exactly what you're looking for when it comes to.
Can you unpack that concept a little bit? Like I hear people talking about value floor and value ceiling. What does that actually mean?
Sure. So I've written a few articles about this over on Commander's Herald. We'll link to those in the description as well. But value floor is how good a card is on its own. If a card like Phyrexian Arena or Wheel of Fortune, for instance, is a card that in the worst case scenario is going to pitch a hand of 7 cards and draw you 7 new cards. That's going to give you options. That's the value floor on a card. The value ceiling on a card is if you have 0 cards in hand except for this Wheel of Fortune, and you Wheel of Fortune and you get 7 brand new cards.
Right, you're +7 in card advantage, right?
Exactly.
That's like best case scenario.
Right. Then Synergy is taking that and doing something else for drawing those additional cards or discarding cards from your hand. So Synergy is taking that Wheel of Fortune, which is good on its own in a large case of scenarios, and making it even better because the primary strategy of your deck deals with that.
Right.
A fantastic example is if you're building a Riel the Everwise deck.
Oh, yeah.
And Riel the Everwise says the first time you discard cards in a turn, you draw that many cards.
Right. So when you're casting your Wheel of Fortune with Riel in play, you're discarding the cards. That triggers Riel. you draw your cards to finish the Wheel of Fortune effect, the card effect. Then Riel's trigger resolves and you draw an additional 7 cards.
Exactly.
So we've now amplified the effect of the Wheel of Fortune, so it becomes discard 7, draw 14. Right. So we've now got a situation where, Wheel of Fortune would have done one thing by itself, Riel would have done something else by itself, but now Riel is modifying Wheel of Fortune to make it more effective.
And in turn, Wheel of Fortune has now pitched those instants and sorceries into your graveyard, increasing Riel's power. Right. So that's synergy. When the 2 cards feed off of each other, when they make each other better, when your deck makes itself better, that's synergy.
Now, can we talk about second order? We talked about this is a very, very good example of a primary synergy, right? So using that same example, Riel, what would you say would be a good second order synergy for that Wheel of Fortune, right?
So I would say if you're building a flashback package into the deck, you're going to be discarding cards because you want to synergize on a primary order with your commander, Riel, who wants you to discard cards. But you've packed your deck with a bunch of flashback cards. So when you discard them, you still have access to them. Right. You aren't losing access to them. So even if Riel's not in play, you have cards that synergize with Riel that make you discard cards. Yep. Now you have cards that you're okay discarding because you get to cast them from the graveyard anyway, whether it be a Past in Flames or a Faithless Looting, or whether you've got a Snapcaster Mage to cast an instant later. Now you are synergizing off of cards that are in to synergize with your commander. Right. Even if your commander's not in play, they work with each other.
Yeah, and really, in an abstract sense, that specific example is reducing the cost of Wheel of Fortune, because the cost of Wheel of Fortune is a card, the Wheel of Fortune.
But then there's the opportunity cost to
of the cards that you're pitching, right? So now what you're doing is, rather than saying, I'm going to pitch some number of cards to my graveyard, what you're doing is you're saying, well, if I have a high density of flashback cards in the deck, then when I discard them, they're not gone forever like they would normally be.
Exactly. Yeah. You still have access to them. You haven't lost those resources. Sure, if you're discarding a hand of 7 and 4 of those cards have flashback, technically you're down 3 cards only because you have access to those 4 cards out of your graveyard that you can recast.
Right, for sure, for sure. So what would you say, second order synergy sounds awesome. When you can find overlap like this Wheel of Fortune example in a Riel deck that kind of bridges 2 functional packages of Riel Voltron and Flashback Tribal or whatever, right? Could you then go tertiary synergy and say what about stuff that helps with flashback?
Right, and you can do that even if it's not helping out your primary game plan of synergizing with your commander. I would say Fact or Fiction would be a great example of this, because it doesn't technically discard cards, but it does put cards into your graveyard. Yeah. So it's got synergy with those flashback cards that you can dump into your yard. And it's got a little bit of synergy with Riel, because Riel cares about the instants and sorceries in your graveyard, but it doesn't directly combo. It doesn't directly synergize with Riel. Yeah. So it would be on the outskirts. And the further out you get from synergizing with your primary, secondary, and tertiary game plans, the more likely you are to find cards that are easier to cut in your deck. So if you're looking at 105 cards in your list and you're seeing you've got primary synergy strategies, secondary synergy strategies, and tertiary synergy strategies, the further away from your goals a card is, the easier it is to find cuts.
Right. So would you say then, if you were to prioritize what you want to do in a game, right, and go hard on your primary synergy, right? Look for the connectors that connect it to other things that are going on in your deck. Then as you get further and further and further away from your primary synergy, those cards on the outskirts are the ones that you should look to for those 5 cuts.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, I gotcha.
Like I mentioned earlier, if you're laying this out visually and you're looking at your strategies being 3 different circles, where they overlap either with each other or everything with each other, those are your synergies.
Keep those. Hang on to those.
Exactly. Those are the ones that are keepers, because they'll do you well no matter what you're doing in the deck, no matter what strategies you're going. But the ones that only work for one strategy and don't have a high value floor on them, meaning they aren't just good on their own, they fall towards the outside of these circles of strategy. And the closer to the outside of these circles of strategy you have a card, the more likely it is that you want to cut it.
Yeah, because like those are the ones where you're going to draw them in game, and they have fewer situations where you're going to be like, yeah, I love this card, right?
Right, exactly.
Unless it's just a pet card. And again, this is not a situation where you're always going to be powering up your deck. This is not a formula. It can be a formula for powering up your deck, but primarily this is a strategy to increase consistency in your deck.
Exactly.
Right? And consistency can mean a lot of things. If you want to consistently do a particular thing, even if that thing's not winning, this will help you do that.
Right. And it is important to note that not everybody builds decks to win. Sometimes you just want to do something, take a game action, make something special, tell a story. That's fantastic. But if you've got a deck that you're having trouble getting it to do the thing, synergy is where you should be looking at, because it's going to end up making you a deck that does the thing more often, because you can rely on other pieces to fill in holes. There's overlap, there's redundancy, there's synergy. You're going to be able to do the thing. Right.
So can you maybe give me an example of a situation where going too hard on a first order synergy is not a good idea?
Yes. Yeah. And this is something that I'm at fault for a lot. I build a lot of decks that rely heavily on their commanders, because you always have access to your commander. And I should qualify that. You don't always have access to your commander, because it might get removed over and over and over again. If you're relying on a 5 mana value commander and it gets removed once or twice, you're probably not casting it again for the rest of the game. And you need to fall back on another synergy, another strategy. We recently played a game where our friend Alex was playing Finn the Fangbearer deck, which is a deck that leans very heavily into the poison counters granted by Finn on combat damage with death touch creatures. But in that game, Finn was removed several times.
Oh, I'm hearing we've got a clip. We've got a clip. Let's roll the clip.
All right, I will play Cliffhaven Kitesail. When it comes into the battlefield, when it comes into the battlefield, attach it to target creature I control. Finn the Fangbearer gives flying. Move to attack.
I would like to act.
Yes.
I'm going to abrupt decay it.
Oh, that's so mean.
Trigger Vial Smasher.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Trigger Vial Smasher.
Trigger Beastmaster Ascension.
Cast Finn the Fangbearer. I did it.
Stealing my lines. I don't like it. I get so few lines, Janiel. All right.
What are you doing? Casting Finn the Fangbearer.
Command Mechanic. What card is this that we just cast?
That looks like a Finn the Fangbearer.
Why do I play games with you people? Anyway, we're going to go to attacks.
No, go for it.
Okay. We're going to go Air of the Wilds at Jim and Spire Tracer at Commander Mechanic.
All right. No blocks from me.
I also have no blocks. Abrupt Decay.
Murderous Cut.
Daggers.
On Finn?
On Finn.
Yeah.
You are a very bad person.
Well, I mean, I don't want to brag.
But poor Alex didn't have access to his primary strategy piece for the latter half of that game. And that brought the overall synergies in his deck down significantly.
Yeah, because like the creatures in his deck, say the 1-drop death touch 1/1s, right?
Right.
Those are really strong synergy with the commander. That's a really tight synergy. But it's a dependency as well.
Exactly.
Right? So it's good in this deck, provided certain conditions are met. And that condition is you have to have Finn in play.
Yeah, exactly. And when you can't have Finn in play, the overall value of cards in your deck otherwise get much, much lower. And that is a cautionary tale here. Don't go too deep onto a primary strategy. You need to have backup plans in a deck. If you have a thing that you want to do and you only have one thing that you want to do, sure, go hard on it. But if you've got multiple things that you want to do, if you're building a deck where you want to win, if you're in a play group or a pod where it's like, we definitely want to end this game, we want to win, we're going hard, then you want to make sure that you have multiple ways to do that.
Yeah. And so one thing that I noticed in that game, not too many spoilers if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, then just like mute the thing for the next 15 seconds or so. But one thing that I noticed in that deck, like in terms of secondary synergy with Finn, it's nice because these things operated without Finn being in play, but Beastmaster Ascension was a good one. I would imagine like Oran Frostfang would be a good one.
Exactly.
Because you're already running all these Death Touch creatures, might as well turn them into card advantage, right?
Right.
You're already going wide, so you might as well Beastmaster Ascension.
Exactly. And that's where you find the secondary strategy comes in, is you're starting to go wide to begin with Finn. Then you need to find a way to pivot and go tall. And that's where something like Beastmaster Ascension came in. Suddenly your 1/1 Death Touchers are 5/5 Death Touchers.
Exactly. And that is scary. I can tell you that firsthand.
Exactly. Yep. And that's synergy for you. And that's a perfect example of pivoting from one strategy to another strategy with cards within your deck.
Right. So, Chris, tell me, if there was one thing that you want people to take away from this episode, what would it be?
Don't be precious with your cuts. I know a lot of people have pet cards. It's great to include pet cards in your deck, but if they're not doing anything for you, if they're not doing anything towards the strategies of your deck, if they're on the outside of this Venn diagram of strategies, consider cutting them.
Right.
Because you're going to feel worse drawing a card off the top that doesn't do anything for you than you are drawing a card off the top that's going to do something regardless of which strategy you're going for.
Yeah, I think that's a really great takeaway. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good place to wrap it. If you want to take a look at Chris's stuff, Chris is an incredibly talented deck builder and has his own YouTube channel called Commander Mechanic. We'll have the details in the show notes, as well as, I believe you write articles as well for Commander's Herald. Right?
That's right. Every other Thursday, you can find my stuff.
Yeah, and we will have the links for that as well in the description.
Right. It'll be more like this as well. I talk about technical deck building and crafting a better play experience before you ever sit down at a table.
Yeah, I love that. Chris' stuff is great. You should definitely check it out. But I think we're going to wrap it there. And I hope all of you have an awesome day. And I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Thanks for coming out.
Take care, folks.
Bye, everybody. Hey, thank you for checking out the Spike Feeders on YouTube. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button before you close the window. Or you can click on this link to check out our other great videos.